welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker. I'm joined by Ben Goessling and Andrew Krammer, all of us of the Minnesota Star Tribune. And it's Friday. We're going to answer some questions. We're going to recap what's happened so far in free agency this week, hoping that not too much crazy happens as soon as we get off this and start to distribute this podcast to you, though who knows? It certainly could. And
it's usually a good way to jinx it.
Yeah, sorry. knock on wood. We got to insert that knock on wood gif that I made again here. Yeah. Would have been good for me to upload that. But I'll start by answering a question that was posed in our YouTube comments the other day. No, we are not all in different rooms in the same house. Yeah. But yes, we do have quite similar backgrounds going on behind us. It's the gray wall, it's the white wall, whatever. But looking at this week as a whole for the Vikings, if my math's correct, which I double checked it a couple times, I think we're standing right now at 7 acquisitions, 7 signings, 5 re-signs, 7 departures, and then also the Ed Ingram trade, which we'll get to start. A lot of the signings we covered early in the week on the first 2 podcasts we did, but they did bring in Buccaneers tackle Justin Skule yesterday. Ben, that I think you were one of the first people to have that out there. Just what is that addition of Skule indicate maybe about where Christian Darrisaw is in his injury recovery and what the Vikings plans are at tackle in addition to the interior offensive line moves they've made?
Yeah, just a housekeeping note on that first. The paint shade, I believe, is uncertain gray on my wall. I think it's the one we did. So maybe that's a good metaphor for an office covering the Vikings. So, yeah, the gray background is, in fact, there. But no, we are not in a Star Tribune real-world house or something to that effect. So to answer that question, clear that up. Yeah, it's just a coincidence, I think. But on Justin Skule, yeah, I think it's depth at tackle, which they need, and it's another option in case Christian Darrisaw's recovery from that ACL takes longer than they would like, which is also, I think, a wise way to go about it. I think this was one of those second-level needs we thought they probably would go after at some point. Skule, I think, has started 17 games in the NFL, so has enough experience and enough kind of time in that spot starter role that he seemed like a good fit from that perspective. So, yeah, I think that's something they were needing to do. It's something they had to address given Darrisaw's health, and you just want a good swing tackle anyway. So one of those signings that probably isn't going to get a ton of headlines this time of year, but may be an important subplot to things come October, November, when offensive line injuries inevitably pop up, because they always do.
Yeah, and it would seem to bid adieu to David Quessenberry, who's 34 years old and a free agent. He's not getting any younger. And then Cam Robinson, obviously, is a free agent still, although he's one of those guys who could sign as soon as we stop recording this podcast. But I would assume that means, yeah, he's not coming back. Quessenberry's not coming back. This would seem to be their swing tackle.
We'll stick with the O-line here and go over to that Ed Ingram trade, which we had expected that they were going to move on from Ed Ingram. I believe it was a $5.2 million cap hit that he was going to cause this year. And so they end up getting value back for him. They trade him to the Texans for a 2026 6th-round pick. Yeah, not many surprises there, but what's the value? Like how great do we think that 6th-round return is for him?
I mean, the fact they got anything at all, I think it's pretty good.
Yep.
I mean,
yeah, I agree. The surprise is that they could trade him. In Houston got rid of one of the worst guards, and Kenyon Green sent him to Pittsburgh or so. I can't remember where, but they got rid of one of the worst guards. They got rid of Laramie Tunsil, and they're just kind of blowing up a bad O-line. And
we saw it last September. It was really bad.
Yeah, and then they bring in Ed Ingram, and then there was another guard. I think it was Laken Tomlinson, who had a very bad year last year as well. And it's like, holy cow, like, what are you exactly doing? But hey, Kwesi and the Vikings will take it.
Yeah, I saw a few comments yesterday, people asking, did they hate CJ Stroud? Like, why are they doing this to him?
Yeah, well, and I also saw a lot about, so the Vikings are also trying to trade Garrett Bradbury, which is also something that we kind of predicted was going to happen with the signing of Ryan Kelly earlier this week at that center position. And there was a lot of comments of, okay, so Ed Ingram can get a 6th-round pick. Yeah. What are we get? We have to get something for Garrett Bradbury, right?
Yeah, he must go for a 4th rounder, right? if you're getting a 6th for Ed Ingram. But With Garrett too, that we kind of telegraphed this. It seemed like it was on the Vikings telegraphed it by signing Ryan Kelly. So Ben, like, are they going to recoup at least money if they have to let go of Garrett? Like, what's the situation with him?
Yeah, they I think would get back like $3.5 million if they were to cut him. I think he's a free agent after this year, but he had a void year in there as well. So they will get, I mean, they'll have a little bit of dead money to go with it, but they would get some money back if they were to cut him. And I'm sure, you play this out a little bit and try to get something back in a trade if you can, but well, we'll see. I mean, he's a 29-year-old center, so there may be somebody that wants to avoid a bidding war for him. I don't know how much of a bidding war there would be, but maybe somebody offers you a late round pick. But otherwise, yeah, they would save. I think it's 3.6 in cap space if they were to cut him.
Well, Ben, what do we make? I mean, you and I covered Garrett's entire career here. The highest drafted center in franchise history, had a lot of ups and downs. At some point along the Zimmer tenure, I don't think you or I thought he'd be here even this long.
Right. Yes.
What do you make of just kind of his tenure here? And I don't know, I don't want to say legacy is the wrong word for a middling center, but what do you make of kind of what he was able to do here and where he leaves this offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's worth talking about because the fact that he was the highest drafted center in franchise history means that they went in expecting him to be the guy for, 10 years is always nice. And we talk about draft picks saying they don't have to think about this again for 10 years. Realistically, it's, if you get 5 out of a guy, it's pretty good because then it saves you having to spend it on a veteran. But, I mean, it's a mixed bag. I mean, he loses the job in 21, like we talked about the other day. The fact that they stuck with him in the Kevin O'Connell years was a little bit of a surprise. And then they can, obviously keep him for 3 years in the Kevin O'Connell era, partially probably because he was affordable. But, we saw a lot of those same things happen over and over and over, whether it was Kenny Clark or Grady Jarrett or Dexter Lawrence or, go on down the line of big, impactful, powerful, dynamic defensive tackles, either just running him over or getting around him. And it never seemed like they were able to, whether it was him on a different diet or putting different guards next to him, they were never really able to mitigate that problem. And that's why they're talking about moving on from him at this point for a guy that is as old, I think a little bit older than him, and has had more injury issues. So it tells you they were looking at this and saying, it's not just the guards. We need an upgrade at center. We need somebody that can hold their ground a little more effectively than Garrett Bradbury was able to do. So, yeah, in the end, it's like, that pick was always one where you said, okay, taking a center, I think 18th overall, is this a good use of a first round pick? I mean, there were a lot of questions about that at the time. They certainly needed a center, but yeah, it is. If you look back at it, it's like, it's not a failure, but is it unequivocal success with that pick? I don't know that I would say that.
No, yeah, I wouldn't either, just because when he was on the field a lot, he was durable for them, but he just was not the kind of guy you needed him to be when you take him in the first round. And yeah, as we mentioned, highest drafted center in franchise history, and they move on from him to take another highest drafted center in the Colts franchise history, and Ryan Kelly, who, as you said, he's 32 in May. He missed 7 games last year, 5 to right knee surgery, 2 to a neck injury. He had 2 concussions the year before, in which that caused him, I think, to miss 3 games in 2023. So Ryan Kelly's been really banged up, and it reflects the way he plays. He's a very physical guy. He embodies the kind of things that they wanted Garrett Bradbury to do. But
play style.
Oh, go ahead. What'd you say?
I just said play style.
Yeah, as Kevin O'Connell says, play style. And ironically, Ryan Kelly's worst game last year, according to Pro Football Focus, was the game at US Bank Stadium in Week 9 last year, where the Vikings beat Joe Flacco and the Colts. And I went back and watched that game, and Harrison Phillips, Jerry Tillery, they were moving Ryan Kelly around with ease. And then you go back and read the reporting around it. That was the last game he had played before he had knee surgery. He had been playing through a right knee injury for weeks by that point and was not the same player. So this guy will gut through injuries. Like they seem to be swinging for a ceiling that Garrett Bradbury could not provide, while admitting and accepting that the floor might be a lot lower for Ryan Kelly if he's not even on the field, in a way that Garrett Bradbury seemingly would be next year. So it's an interesting move, but Garrett, Yeah, he was here for a long time. He was exactly the kind of person that the Vikings wanted. It's just player-wise, he didn't really live up to that.
Yeah, and with Ryan Kelly too, it's like, I mean, this is basically a one-year deal. So that, I mean, if we're talking about the future of that position, that's probably the other thing to keep in mind here, because he gets like a $6.6 million signing bonus, and I did not see any void years in that deal, but the only guaranteed money in it is that signing bonus, and then this year's base salary, which is $1.755 million, is fully guaranteed. So all of the money you really owe him is coming in the first year of this deal. And if there's injuries, we think Michael Juergens is ready, you can move on. I mean, there would be $3.3 million of dead money, but relative to what you'd save, which I think is in the $9 million range, certainly something they could look at doing if they don't feel good about it.
Lots of moves on the offensive line for the Vikings this week, in and out. Lots of Prince memes when it was announced that Harrison Smith will be back for another season on, what was that? I guess Wednesday night? Wednesday night sounds correct.
March 13th is like Harrison Smith Day. I mean, it's like every year is, well, I mean, this year was March 12th, but yeah, March 13th was the Prince meme. And we have done this every year with Harrison Smith right around that time.
I don't remember if it was an off podcast or on podcast discussion we had the other day, but all of us were like, oh, the emotionality in the locker room, like it must be done. And Andrew, you were the one who said, well, I thought that last year. And then Harrison Smith came back anyway. So I guess, like, how surprised are we that this ended up happening? And then Ben, can you give us a little bit more of the details on what they signed him to and how long they have him under contract now?
1 second. My wife is just texting me. She's making a Target run and asking if I need anything. So getting her response to that, and then I will respond on Harrison Smith. So priorities. Was I surprised a little? I mean, because he was, we've seen it the last few years. He was pretty emotional, but I texted with him a little bit the other day, and he said, I had to give it another go. He just, I think, felt good enough, and kind of in that mindset of, you hear some players talk about this, that they'll talk to retired players that tell them you should play as long as you can because you don't get it back. And if you're on the fence of, do I want to do one more year, go do it because it doesn't come back. So he's made no secret of the fact he enjoys playing with Brian Flores. He enjoys playing with this group of guys. I think there's a lot of things to like for him about the way they use him in this defense, and I expect they'll still continue to use him in a lot of those ways in 2025. He actually did quite nicely here on the contract. It's like a $10.25 million base, I think, and there's like some roster bonus stuff in there that totals another $750K between per game roster bonuses, and there's some stuff based on his playing time with snaps. Haven't seen the full details of that yet. And then there's like $3 million in incentives. So he can move this as far up as $14 million if he has a great year. I'm sure those incentives are pretty hard to hit, I think they are for a lot of these guys. That's what I've heard of Byron Murphy too, is that these are pretty lofty incentives. So it's I think one where they value him as much as a leader and kind of a standard bearer in that locker room as they do a player at this point. And they have said, both Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores have clearly said, this is worth our time and this is worth our money because this guy is pretty unique. And, looking it up, he will, if he plays every game this season, which he's a hard guy to keep off the field, he will, I believe, tie Carl Eller for like the third most games in Vikings franchise history. Wow. Which, it's just kind of wild. I mean, you sit there. I mean, you and I have had this too with Adam Thielen, Andrew, where you cover every day of a guy's career and you kind of just watch it. And TV episodes, you're not watching the whole movie, so to speak. Shout out Cam Bynum with movie, I guess, but you don't kind of look at the 30,000 foot level of things very much when you're just covering the day to day. But you stop and think about it, like Carl Eller. I mean, Carl Eller is, if he's not on the Mount Rushmore of Vikings players, he's pretty close to that. And obviously a Pro Football Hall of Famer, played at Minnesota, one of the Purple People Eaters, certainly, one of the more productive Purple People Eaters as a pass rusher. So when you're in conversations with guys like that, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, this is a guy that will be a shoo-in for the Ring of Honor. I think his Hall of Fame credentials are going to be an interesting thing to watch. The more he plays, the more of these career stats he racks up. I think he'll have a better chance. May not be right away, but I think he's going to have a fairly good chance to go into the Hall of Fame. But yeah, he continues the career and continues to kind of build that legacy with the Vikings, which is getting to the point where there aren't many guys in Vikings history that have matched it. It's pretty unique.
It is. Yeah. And I was surprised to see this announcement just because it had felt like we'd already gone through this last year where he seriously contemplated retirement and he sounded broken and physically broken by the end of last year and the 2023 season. So when he was, to the point of shedding tears in the locker room at the end of the Rams loss in the playoffs in January, you're thinking, yeah, this guy's absolutely done. And I remember him saying that night that he said, this time it's different in terms of his considerations. And I asked why. And he said, well, it's because of his family, because of his kids, because of the family life, like all that stuff changes. And I mean, Ben's adding the context that he's saying, he wants to give it another go. And like, clearly, yeah, this is so impossible for guys to let go. And if you feel like you've got a team that still wants you, your team that still wants you, I mean, that's why it ended with these longtime Vikings, is because they didn't want them anymore. That's why Thielen's gone. That's why Rudolph left. That's why Greenway left. Like these long-term guys get kicked out, whereas Harrison's got this wide open door. He can kind of come and go whenever he wants and get paid market rate seemingly. So he's got a good thing going. And if he's broken again by December and January, that's to be expected for a guy his age, but they'll probably get to wherever they get to next season. It'll be in large part because of him being on the field. And I think him being there with Theo Jackson, with young corners they're probably going to bring in, all this stuff we talk about, it hasn't led to this great development yet of these young guys on the roster, but they do like a lot of the pieces they've got, whether it's Theo Jackson or Mekhi Blackman, and he's going to play a big part in helping them too. So I was surprised just because of what we hear about him, but the Vikings are going to be better off that he decided to come back for sure.
Little time in that medieval torture device, he'll be ready to go again.
We couldn't make it through a podcast this week without having some mid-podcast news. The Vikings did just announce that they are bringing they agreed to terms with linebacker Eric Wilson, who will return. He has previously been with the team. He's also been with the Packers, the Eagles, the Texans. Andrew, give us a read on him and what he'll bring back to this Vikings.
Yeah, I lit up when you said that because it brought me back to he came in as an undrafted guy, didn't he, Ben? With the Vikings at one point,
in the Zimmer era, he was a guy that like they got pretty excited about when he came in as a UDFA.
Yeah, and he came in behind Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks, and just those guys fell in love with his work ethic. I remember Anthony Barr told me when Barr came back a couple years ago with the Vikings, or maybe it was last year. No, it was 2023, and he had mentioned about because Wilson was a Packer and they were going to play each other, and he had said that guy works as hard as Danielle Hunter. Like there's only one other guy who I've ever been with that works as hard as Danielle, and it's Eric. And that it stood out to me because you don't hear that kind of thing, that kind of comparison very often. But to me,
that's a high bar to compare somebody to.
Yeah.
I remember being in Houston. Just a quick story on Danielle. I remember being in Houston because he was working out with Adrian Peterson down in Texas when Adrian opened his gym down there, and Danielle Hunter was kind of working out with this group of people down there. It's Houston in the middle of July, so the air is so thick you can drink it, and he's out running 400s with all and beating like corners and safeties. This is a defensive lineman that's running 400-meter sprints and outlasting all of these guys. I mean, it's a long sprint, so there's some endurance involved as well, some speed endurance. But watching him do that, it's like holy cow, he's a specimen. So yeah, getting compared to that level of work ethic is it's no small compliment.
And that's how you stick around for he's a what year guy now at this point?
Ninth season, it says.
Yeah, you be a UDFA last 9 years, you got to be able to work hard and grind. So he's made the most of what he is. And at this point, he was a part-time defender for Green Bay, seemingly did well enough. But this would strike me as your Camus, Grugier, Hill replacement if they need one. Kind of that veteran guy, special teamer. Camus was second on the team last year in special team snaps. He's the highest or the most active special teamer who's a free agent for the Vikings. So this strikes me as that kind of a move if they expect Grugier Hill to leave, because they're happy with Cashman and Pace. Those are the two guys, obviously, who are going to be playing defense for him.
The Vikings also announced this morning that former Falcons wide receiver Rondale Moore is visiting Egan, visiting TCO. Ben, you said on socials that Moore would bring a different component to the passing game. Can we get your elaboration on what that component is?
Well, I mean, Gophers fans should know what I'm talking about. I mean, he had some big days against the
Minnesota too.
Yeah, well, he was a Purdue guy in college, but he had
Gopher killer.
Some big days against the Gophers. He's one of those receivers that he's like 5'7". I mean, they got him for Kyler Murray. We've seen him a little bit, a guy that you can throw underneath balls to, kind of screens or shallow crossers and let him go to work. He's shifty. He'll be a special teams guy. He was hurt last year, but he can fly. So one of those guys that, I mean, they haven't had a guy like this in this receiving core quite in that way. I mean, Brandon Powell maybe is the closest thing, but I think he's more dynamic than Brandon Powell. I mean, Jalen Naylor's straight line speed, but this guy is a lot more shifty, a lot more, be able to throw the brakes on, turn the corner type guy when he's healthy than they've had. So yeah, a little bit of a, could be a, short, quick game kind of option for JJ McCarthy. I mean, we talked a lot about quick game stuff, and some of the feedback you hear on that from people with the Vikings is, hey, quick game is not the cure-all. It's not like a button you just push all of the time that fixes everything if your line can't protect. But I do think if he gets a role as a guy that can make things happen with the ball in his hands, it'll be interesting to see. It's just it's a different type of skill set than we've seen in this receiving room in a little while, I think.
Yeah, and this isn't to say that Jefferson or Addison can't catch and run, but that's really all Moore is known for. He's known as that, tackle breaking, take a 5-yard play, 60 yards. And the Vikings are well aware of his big play ability. We were there in Arizona for his second game in 2021, where right before halftime, broken play, Kyler Murray makes something happen, finds a wide open Moore 30 yards downfield. Moore catches and runs another 40 for a touchdown. Vikings end up losing that game in big part because of that play. So this guy can create, but that was the biggest play Moore ever had as a Cardinal, and that was his second game. So they trade him a year ago to Atlanta. He suffers a season-ending injury in a joint practice in August. So I imagine much of what the Vikings are doing in bringing him in is not just to get a feel for the fit, but also to get a feel for where he's at physically from that recovery and that knee injury, because he would need to come back, recover to once again be that same guy he used to be at Purdue and early on. But yeah, Ben's right. They don't have a ton of guys who are known as the rugged catch and run types. Addison, for as good as he is much more of a dynamic downfield deep threat. And Justin Jefferson can do everything, but he's also not the kind of guy that, he's not Jamar Chase. He certainly lacks in that rugged build who can break tackles. So Moore would be a different dynamic. It's just, I want to know who's blocking for them, because much of their short area issues is that they don't have perimeter blocking. Jefferson's not a great blocker. Addison's not a great blocker. Jalen Naylor, is probably the best one they have, but doesn't get on the field a ton because of their two tight end stuff. So the amount of times we saw one of their screens blow up on the perimeter because Addison got pushed back or Jefferson missed his block. I mean, I just imagine that leads to a lot of frustration for Kevin O'Connell, who's hearing the criticism of his short area quick game. Yeah. Was saying, look, this isn't the 2021 Rams. We don't have tunnel screens out the wazoo to Cooper Kupp and all these other guys. So it's just a different personnel grouping. And with Moore, he would bring a dynamic as a ball carrier, but they still need guys to block for him.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not a group that has a terribly dedicated blocking receiver. I mean, Trent Sherfield was that guy, but you can't have Trent Sherfield on the field all the time, or at least you're not going to. You need some of your main receiving weapons to do some of those things. And that's not probably the biggest strength of this group's skill set. Let's put it that way.
Andrew, you mentioned Cooper Kupp. His name was the second most mentioned in the questions we got under Ben's call out for mailbag questions here for us to answer. So let's go ahead and start with him before we get to the other name that was mentioned quite a lot. Is there any chance that Cooper Kupp lands here? We talked about this last month when it was first announced that the Rams were going to try and trade him and then release him if they couldn't find a trade. He has been released and is now testing the market. There's different reports out there of where he might land, how much he's asking for. But Ben, Andrew, either of you, what do you think the odds are that Minnesota could be the place he lands?
Well, I mean, they are big fans of him. I mean, you've heard Wes Phillips talk about him a number of times. Kevin O'Connell's talked about him a number of times. I mean, he was the Super Bowl MVP on the team that helped springboard Kevin O'Connell to become a head coach and Wes Phillips to become an offensive coordinator. So they certainly have a high opinion of him. I think the question would be the role. If he feels like he can do more than be, because here he's probably wide receiver 3 on a team that also has a tight end that gets the ball a lot. So I don't know if that would be something that he would want to do at this point, because then the role has to match with the money. And if the role is smaller here, the money may not be as good. So how serious this would get, I think, is kind of an open question. But I mean, there is no doubt that the people that run the football team in Minnesota are big fans of Cooper Kupp. So, if the fit is there, I could certainly see it happening.
It's worth noting when Ben brings up the role. I think that's an excellent point, because the role is not only going to dictate what Cooper Kupp wants to do, it's going to dictate the money that they might be willing to offer him. If they don't envision him earning, 10 plus million on what role they have available. And if you look at the Vikings stats, their top 6 target getters from last season are all returning. And the top guy who was already left is Johnny Munt at 27 targets. He's vacating. So, it would be Jalen Naylor. It would be him replacing Naylor, certainly as the number 3. But even that role last year for Naylor got him 28 catches on 42 targets. So you want to give Addison and Jefferson as much as possible. Those guys deserve it. And Cooper Kupp, when you saw him last year, he wasn't much. I mean, he had some 100-yard games. He had a little bit of a run when Puka was down. But by and large, the Rams seem to kind of phase him out. And there's a reason why he's no longer in L.A. So I do wonder if asking price and kind of where he sees himself, because that led Adam Thielen. I mean, they wanted to move on from Adam, but that led Adam to Carolina, was the money they were willing to give him, the role he saw himself having, which he's had there. And I wouldn't be shocked if Cooper goes and chases those exact same things. Yeah.
I mean, Thielen, we heard a lot of talk about how he wanted to go be at number 1, and everybody was kind of like, okay, if you can get that, good for you. And he has. Now he hasn't been able to win very much there, but yeah, it kind of depends on what you're looking for at this stage of his career. And Cooper Kupp obviously has a ring. I'm sure he wants another one, but he's not sitting there with that unfulfilled kind of hole in his heart, so to speak, of I've never been to a Super Bowl. I just want to get one. I want to be on a contending team. I mean, I'm sure that's a priority, but he's done it. So it's not probably the driving factor, maybe in quite the same way. I don't know. This is me conjecturing, not having talked to him about it, certainly. But how he feels about where he fits in the overall pecking order of a team at this point probably has a lot to do with whether the Vikings are a serious consideration, because if he comes here, it's not breaking news that he would not be at the top of the pecking order in the receiving room.
And there are certainly teams out there right now that still need a wide receiver 2, if not a wide receiver 1. I know the Seahawks have been kind of tossed around as an option for him. They kind of cleared house on their receivers this week, sending DK to the Steelers and then releasing Tyler Lockett, who had been there for
Seattle. Sam Darnold, you have no receivers other than
Darnold's waiting to find out who he's going to throw to besides Jackson Smith and Jigba. So I agree that as much love as there might be for Cooper Kupp here, it does not feel like necessarily the situation he would choose for himself if he's still looking to be a productive player, top of the league or close to the top of the league wide receiver as he has been before. That's the Cooper Kupp conversation. The other name that got dropped the most in the questions is the one I'm sure everyone can predict.
Here we go.
And that was Aaron Rodgers. I had to paraphrase most of the questions just because of some of the sentiments that are being shared. This is a family podcast by the Minnesota Star Tribune. But certainly it does not seem like at least our listeners and followers would be thrilled with an Aaron Rodgers acquisition, signing. Ben, you talked a little bit about this with our coworker Mike Rand on the Daily Delivery podcast yesterday, but how much fire is there underneath this smoke? Like, how much of this is just kind of smoke and mirrors versus an actual thing that could happen?
Ayahuasca smoke? Do you smoke ayahuasca? I don't even know.
I think that would take too long to explain to you and the podcast listeners.
Yeah, probably. Anyway, smoke and fire. Let's see. Here's where I would put this. I don't know how serious a possibility there is that this actually happens. It would take a lot of things being resolved. Questions of cultural fit, questions of how long of a relationship is this, questions of what does this mean for JJ McCarthy. So I just, questions of contract, terms, all of those things would be part of this. I don't quite know that there will be enough momentum to push that ball over the top of the hill, so to speak. But there is enough intrigue here, both on the part of Aaron Rodgers, as I understand it, with what the Vikings are doing, and certainly the Vikings know Aaron Rodgers' resume, which is like few in NFL history. I mean, Tom Brady certainly has more rings. I think Tom Brady has said that nobody has played the position at a higher level than Aaron Rodgers, and that probably includes Patrick Mahomes. I mean, I think you can debate that certainly, but Rodgers, I mean, Andrew, we've watched him kill the Vikings for years, and in his prime, he killed them in a way that nobody has done, including Brett Favre. He was better against them than Brett Favre was. And in some nights where he makes throws, you're just like, what are you supposed to do about this? So I'm sure they're at least saying, okay, if we put this guy in this offense with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and if it works for a year, maybe we make a run. I mean, this is Kevin O'Connell has a ring. Wes Phillips has a ring. Other coaches on the staff have a ring because of this approach. Matthew Stafford, not Aaron Rodgers, younger in his career. Yes, all of that. But I think there's at least enough. And the example I used, we were talking off air, is like if some company calls you, you're like, I don't know if I actually see a fit there, but yeah, I'll take the meeting. I mean, let's at least have a conversation and see if anything is sparked. I think that's about where I would put it. I don't know that there's much more to it, but I will say this. There have been plenty of opportunities for the Vikings to shoot this down because everybody's talking about it, and that has not happened. So the fact that hasn't happened when everybody's talking, if there was nothing here, it would probably have gotten shot down. So read into that what you will, but I don't think it's shout out Derek Wetmore, Andrew's former colleague at 1500. There is a non-zero chance that this happens. I would put it that way.
That's a great point, though, about them not shooting it down, because whether it's you, whether it's anybody locally or nationally, there has not been anybody saying no from the Vikings side of things. It's always been framed as possibility, discussions, open to it. That makes you think that, boy, if it's not a no, well, it certainly sounds like kind of a yes, that they're at least open to having those discussions.
You know what it sounds like, Andrew? It sounds like a maybe.
A Brett Favre.
We're going to do the Favre parallels here.
What's interesting to me is that they are signing old guys. Like, they are signing guys to, and you could look at this one of two ways. You could look at this as they are trying to take advantage of a rookie contract window, which we all know they've wanted to do. Yep. By spending to build around JJ McCarthy and get him ready to win right away, regardless of where he's at in his development. Or that this also leaves open the flexibility of adding a veteran who could help you compete right away. And I do think it's important to talk about this in the context of the quarterbacks available are not good. The other options are not good. However low you think of Aaron Rodgers from what we just saw in New York on the field, just keeping it on the field, however low you think of what he is, it's better than Russell Wilson, I would presume. It's better than Joe Flacco, Jacoby Brissett. It's better than any number of guys that are still looking for work. Ryan Tannehill, who didn't even play on a team last year for the Minnesota Vikings, or excuse me, for any team, didn't play on any team in the NFL last year after getting let go by the Titans. So
I did hear that name this week.
Oh, then that's why it just fell out of my head. Yeah. So like all these guys that are out there, it just is not really great. So if you're the Vikings, how does it behoove you to say no to a 4-time NFL MVP and just say, you know what? Yeah, as Ben said, we'll take the meeting.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is the options are dwindling, but you still have these two big market options in Rodgers, and then Russell Wilson is like the 1B of this conversation of he's kind of waiting on Rodgers as well because they're all in the mix for the same teams. But you have other guys kind of dropping off here. And I there was some of this sentiment in the questions that we got of why are they waiting so long? Are they going to run out of options? Mason Rudolph signed to go back with the Steelers.
Trying to make a decision.
Mason Rudolph signed to go back with the Steelers. Mac Jones went to the 49ers. Those were two guys that had just kind of been lightly tossed out of, okay, these are guys with experience that could come in and would be firmly a backup to McCarthy. And that type of market is going to continue to dwindle if they don't make a move soon. So, Ben, do you think there's any sort of timeline on this for the Vikings? There doesn't seem to be a timeline for Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is making his own timeline for this decision. But is there a timeline for the Vikings on when they need to get out of these conversations with him or whatever is going on and just commit to someone else?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, because you're right. When you're talking to Aaron Rodgers, you're doing it on his timeline. I mean, you probably have to call him on FaceTime, right? Because you can't get him on his phone when he's at home. I think that was the thing a couple of years ago that he said. But I wonder about that too, because at some point you do have to have a quarterback here. I mean, right now, JJ McCarthy is kind of the guy, and it's very possible that JJ McCarthy will be the guy. I mean, they have set themselves up financially as if JJ McCarthy is going to be the guy. I mean, they're spending money in a way that suggests JJ McCarthy will be the starter. Now, they still have room to fit in a veteran quarterback for 2025, especially if you're not, taking this into 26, 27, which I don't think they would be, but they have operated as if McCarthy's going to be the guy. I still think they want somebody though. And you're right. There are not a lot of great options out there. Joe Flacco was another name I heard this week. I mean, we can kind of go through all of these names. I think Jameis Winston's still out there. You've got, Marcus Mariota just signed, I believe, with another team this week. So he's not out there, but yeah, I think there are enough of those types that they'll look at them. But at the same time, if those guys continue to sign, because they're going to, you don't want to be left empty-handed here. So there is, I think, a little bit of a delicate time frame here because they do want to get something done, and not everybody's going to wait around forever.
And hey, you already brought in 2 Indianapolis Colts. Why not bring in a third and Joe Flacco? Just get that whole Colts 2024 off.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Run it back.
I was going to say former Mizzou quarterback Drew Lock, who was Daniel Jones' teammate on the Giants and was his backup. He's a free agent. Sign him.
Well, and the other one we should bring up, I don't know that this is even going to become a possibility, but Kirk. If Kirk were to get cut in Atlanta, I would think that it will at least be on his radar to make a return to Minnesota. I don't know how interested the Vikings would be in this. We'll have to see it. I haven't gotten the sense that there's been a ton of conversations about that, at least at this point. But he's also a guy that you kind of know. You don't have to have a ton of a conversation about, okay, well, what are we getting with this guy? I mean, they know him as well as anybody in the NFL. He knows them as well as anybody in the NFL. But I've gotten the sense that if he were to get cut and he can't find something where he's got an immediate chance to start, I mean, Cleveland maybe would be the option there. Go kind of reunite with Kevin Stefanski if they are interested in him playing that kind of a role. But if it's not that, he knows Minnesota, he knows the offense, he's close with Kevin O'Connell, he'd still have all of his former teammates, he can move right back in to the old house and the next door neighbor that handles the snow for him. I mean, I don't know if that house, he probably sold the house. I'd probably have to get a new house, but maybe that guy would still come over and do his snow for him. But I mean, there's enough familiarity there that I think they would at least look at it. Now, the question there is familiarity a good thing here, or is familiarity one of those things where you can't go home again and it's not your team anymore and it's JJ McCarthy's team, and how are you fitting into that room? He also shares an agent with Josh McCown. I mean, Josh McCown is not working with Mike McCarthy in the same way he did as a player, but Mike McCarthy repped Josh McCown for a long time. So, there would just be weird dynamics there too, in terms of like the former captain, the guy that Brian O'Neill said he wants to play with like 1,000,000,000% or whatever he said when Kirk left, is back, and you've got a 22-year-old that's trying to kind of make the team his at some point. I don't know. That would be a weird one too in terms of a cultural fit, but if he were to be an option, I don't even know that he will. It seems kind of like the Falcons are talking about hanging on to him, but if he gets his wish, which is absolutely his wish to be able to pick his destination for next year, that could become something that picks up some steam.
Well, it's interesting to hear you talk about that because it speaks to Kirk's pragmatism that he'd be open to coming back after they just kicked him out the door, kind of. I mean, they were open to bringing him back when the Falcons outbid them, but the Vikings were not putting up the kind of money that Atlanta was for his services. And Kirk knew they were looking at drafting a successor anyway. So
they limped in with their bid in terms of, to use the poker term.
It would speak then to his ability to get over the fact that they wanted to move on from him if he is open to coming back. Yeah, it'd be weird because you'd have the old guy in there with the new guy, and I don't know what'd be weirder. Rodgers would be weirder, but it'd be a different kind of weird in terms of the dynamics and things you'd have to go through, because what happens if McCarthy's out there and he's struggling? And then it's like, well, we've seen Kirk do this. He knows the offense. You know what I mean? It would create this kind of interesting dynamic.
Don't have to get in timing with JJ, or I guess we don't call him JJ anymore, Justin Jefferson. You don't have to get in timing with him because they already have it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So it'd be interesting, but and I think maybe the most interesting thing, or one of the most interesting things, would be to see how Vikings fans would react to something like that.
Gosh, that would be polarizing too.
Yeah. Something about it feels kind of Ted Lasso to me, but I don't know if that's just because Ted Lasso's been in the news cycle today or not. But like, just there's
Ted Lasso been in the news cycle for today.
The season 4.
What?
Season 4.
I saw a different.
Get excited! Headline. Season 4 of Ted Lasso coming back.
I gotta. What are they gonna do? He went back.
He's
home.
coaching a women's team.
Oh, okay. Okay. So kind of spin-off ish.
There you go.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Joey moving to LA after Friends.
Let's wrap up with a couple more. I'll toss one of these to each of you, and then there's one for all three of us, or at least the two of you, to answer at the end that I pulled for fun here.
Oh, yes. I know where this one is.
Andrew, we'll start with you. Vikes fan 33 on X asked, one of y'all mentioned on a previous show that running back could be a target in the 3rd or 5th round. Is it at all possible the Vikings select a running back with their first selection, assuming Ashton Genty is the only guy taken before them?
Yeah, I mean, if Ashton Genty were there, I feel like you run up and place the card up there, or at least you seriously consider trading back with a team that might want to jump up to grab him. But this was a conversation at the Combine. This was a conversation when Daniel Jeremiah mocked Travion Henderson to them in the 1st round, and saying that he said, look, they saw what they had in the division with Jahmyr Gibbs, and the Vikings could use somebody like that. That was before they re-signed Aaron Jones and paid him $10 million a year. And it was before Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah spoke at the Combine and said, we could get one of those guys in the 1st round or maybe the 5th round. And it just kind of alluded to the fact that, this guy's very aware of positional value and spending, and what those 1st round picks are worth, both in terms of cost control, in terms of resources for blue chippers to your roster. And if this is truly a deep running back class, as people talk about it, you might be able to get a 3rd round talent in the 5th round. And so I just wouldn't be shocked if they look at this and say, we've got enough needs elsewhere, even after signing all these guys for their offensive and defensive lines, I don't think any of us would be shocked if they drafted a first-round offensive lineman or a first-round defensive lineman, even after all that. So, or a first-round corner after paying Byron Murphy. So I think there are enough needs that it would take Genty probably falling to them, I would think, just because he's clear-cut the number one guy. I think Jeremiah's got him the third-ranked player in this draft. He's comped to LaDainian Tomlinson. This guy's supposed to be incredible as a pro. So I think that's the guy where if he somehow fell to you in the 20s, which I can't imagine happening, it would make a lot of sense. But then there's other guys, Omarion Hampton, Trevion Henderson, who are probably going to go in the first round. And I don't think at this point, and I'm curious to get your thoughts, Ben. Yeah. I don't think at this point the Vikings would do that, considering what they've already allocated at that spot.
Yeah, the positional value thing is interesting. I was just thinking about that as you said it. If Kwesi had been the GM at the time, Garrett Bradbury is probably not here. I don't know that Kwesi's spending pick 18 on a center. Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see how that goes because I think they want to do it. I think drafting one high is not impossible. You do have the positional value question there that we're talking about, but obviously it is a need. And I do know they liked Jahmyr Gibbs a lot a couple of years ago. I don't know. I mean, we never really got the chance to see it because he was gone before they picked, but would they have taken him at 23 instead of Jordan Addison? I don't know that, but I think they at least were looking at him with a fairly high level of interest. So if they got another swing at that with a guy like Genty, would they say, you know what, we've seen what Jahmyr Gibbs does to us, and we want our own answer to some of those things? It would be, you kind of get into this thing of positional value is one thing, but then if you get a guy that you like, just go take him. Don't overthink it. I mean, we have seen Kwesi kind of be on both ends of those spectrums over his 3 years. And, he's talked pretty openly about what he's learned and kind of how he's shifted as a result of that in these first 3 years on the job. So, yeah, I think it's probably more likely as a fifth round option or maybe a third. But, yeah, if something happened there, whether Genty falling or Hampton or, any number of those guys that could go at the back of the first round, I guess I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's more of a possibility than I have thought it to be in the past because they want to run the ball more. They need a successor to Aaron Jones, and I think they have seen they've been on the business end of what can happen if you get a dynamic player at that position.
I think that compensatory third round pick that is now official, that number 97 overall. Yeah, I think that is where I kind of see the running back at this point. I agree with you, Andrew, that I think defensive tackle, corner, that feels more like the first round pick there to me. They talked so highly of Derek Harmon in Indy while we were at the combine that I think if he's there, they'd probably pick him. But speaking of defense, Shug on X asked, will the Vikings be using more of a four-man front defensively this season? I know they have all kinds of formations that break rules, but I'm wondering if Flo will entertain a more traditional 4-3 front since we have the people to do it now. Ben, what do you think about this?
Who are your defensive ends in that scenario? I don't know that I see that. I mean, I think we'll see Jonathan Grenard probably playing with his hand on the ground. We see that in nickel packages, but I'm not quite sure where Andrew Van Ginkel fits in that role. I don't know where Dallas Turner fits in that role. The tackles are more 3-4 body types to me. You maybe see some iterations of it, but I don't know that I'd see that being a regular thing.
Yeah, I would say I think they already have shifted into those things in certain situations, but they've always been a predominantly 3-4 front that when you look at what they have and the versatility of their end group, it fits the 3-4 ability to turn them into your inside linebackers, your outside linebackers. If you transition into a true 4-3, which again, they've done before by turning Van Ginkel or Turner into that weak side linebacker, they can do that on a play-to-play basis. But I don't think these additions signal any kind of change because all you're doing is replacing Tillery and Bullard with Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, which is a pretty good upgrade if they're healthy. Yeah. And then you've still got guys that you can mix in there on rotational basis and situational stuff, whether it's Jalen Redmond, Taki Taimani, Levi Drake Rodriguez, if he comes along. So I think they have enough guys who have been already in this system. I do not see Brian Flores making a wholesale change. That the changes I'm interested to see is if they do actually generate a 4-man pass rush, will he lower the blitz rates?
Yeah.
If they get younger corners like they seem to be, will they play more man coverage like we kept talking about? That never really happened because of their age in the secondary. Or is the trend of the NFL to more zone defense because of these dynamic playmakers on offenses? Is that going to keep Brian Flores in this kind of zone blitz heavy look that he keeps doing? So I think there are trends that could change what they're doing. I think there are some personnel things that could change what they're doing, but I don't think it's going to be the front, considering like what Ben said, how good Van Ginkel already is at what he does, Grenard at what he is doing. And you just put Dallas Turner through kind of a, quick graduate study course in this system and all the roles in this front. You're going to want him now to kind of reap those benefits in the same system next year.
Final question of today's podcast. VG on X asked, what are each of your favorite dad jokes? I had to look. I was like, I'm gonna have to Google a dad joke. Like, it just doesn't come to me authentically because I am not a father. But do either of you have a favorite dad joke?
Oh, Ben, you're gonna have to go first because I'm new at this.
I have several. I twice this week I have used, in fact, maybe even this morning. I was talking with one of my kids about something that they were in the middle of, and I said, yeah, it's intense. It's like camping. Camping is intense. No, the other one I will go with, the one that they probably hear from me the most, and this will be near and dear to your heart, Emily. What is the opening song of High School Musical 2? And they're at the beach.
What time is it?
What time is it? Is the question that's asked, and they say summertime or party time, right?
Summertime.
My usual response to that is time to get a watch. So what time is it? Time to get a watch is what I usually say to them. So I will go with that one. I thought of those two, but I was like, no, in this specific case for we're all in this together, super fan number one over here. I'm going to go with what time is it? Time to get a watch for the High School Musical sequel, which is basically the same plot for the Zennials in the crowd. It's like Saved by the Bell when they went to the beach thing for the summer. It's the same thing, but that one, they play that song on Spotify enough that it gives me opportunity to roast them with that one. So I'll go with that.
I can't think of one. And I'm actually thinking back to because CJ Ham would always start whenever he had like a press conference, is one a year that he would do. He would always try to start off with some dad joke. And I'm actually trying to think back to ones he's told. And
why is 6 afraid of 7? I think he told that one.
There you go.
Has it 8, 9?
It's 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, I mean, boy. I'm drawing a blank here, but the old knocking, the knock on wood, knock on your head one, that just fell out of me. Like it wasn't one I had ready. It just, like Ben said, it was just instinctual, and it honestly scared me. So
I'm telling you, man, there's a hormonal change that happens as a dad when you have kids that they just start happening, and they're bad. They're not like funny jokes, but you just start doing it. I don't know why, but you'll have more.
Yeah, I'm only 6, 7, 8 months into this now, so it'll start building up.
Yep.
Well, for anyone who made it through those final 3 minutes of goofiness that we tacked on here, it's the new MO of this podcast is ending on some goofiness. Thank you guys for listening and or watching. I'm sure we will be, we're waiting on a quarterback, and it feels like a quarterback podcast, whether it be Rodgers or anyone else, will be one that we have to do and spend a whole 30, 40 minutes on. So be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, please check out our work on thestartribune.com, where we'll keep you up to date on all of the other signings in between whatever time it is now, noon on Friday, and whenever the quarterback gets signed. And we will talk to you all whenever that is.